suggest meningitis means inflammation of meninges. So there are three layers of meninges, or like the brain. All of you know dura mater, arachnoid, and pia. So there are three layers: arachnoid layer, pia layer, and dura layer. So there are the three layers. So it is the inflammation of the meningeal layers, which are all like the brain. This inflammation is secondary to infection. This infection can be bacterial and can be viral. But we are mainly concerned with bacterial meningitis. See, dura layer, arachnoid layer, and pia layer. These are the three meningeal layers, or like your brain tissue. This is brain parenchyma. After brain parenchyma comes pia. Then comes in between arachnoid and pia, there is subarachnoid space. This is the arachnoid layer. This is the dura layer, skin, and then skull bone. So the outermost is dura, then arachnoid, and innermost is pia. So as the name suggests, it is the acute inflammation of the meninges, which can be caused either by bacteria or by virus, but we are mainly concerned with bacterial meningitis. So meningitis can be bacterial, viral, fungal, then secondary to autoimmune diseases like SLE, traumatic, and because of cancer metastasis. So inflammation of meninges can be secondary to bacterial infection, viral, fungal, autoimmune diseases. Usually it is called aseptic meningitis, then traumatic, and then because of cancer, that is secondary metastasis. Now how the bacteria gain entry? How the bacteria get entry into your brain or up to the brain? How they reach up to the brain to cause meningitis? The most common route for entry of bacteria to your central nervous system is hematogenous route via bloodstream. Any infectious focus elsewhere in the body which can cause septicemia or bacteremia. Once these bacteria they get into your bloodstream, then they reach to central nervous system. That is hematogenous route. So, infectious focus elsewhere in the body leading to bacteremia or septicemia, and then these bacteria they reach via bloodstream, that is hematogenous route, up to the central nervous system and cause meningitis. The most common example is secondary to pneumonia. The most common example is secondary to pneumonia, which can cause distant metastasis and meningitis. It's a complication of pneumonia, that is meningitis. So most common route of entry for bacteria into your central nervous system to cause meningitis is hematogenous route. Then direct spread from adjacent area. So which are the adjacent area? This is the area which are close to the brain. Area which are close to brain. So mostly the infections of nose, infections of sinuses, infection of the ear, infection of the mastoid area, like mastoiditis, sinusitis, then otitis media, like that. So there is direct spread because these areas are very close to your brain. So infection can directly spread to brain. Then medical procedures, surgery of the brain or any intervention, that is nosocomial. And then from exterior means direct trauma, fracture of the skull. So bacteria get entry from outside, that is from environment. So these are the routes of entry for the bacteria to reach to central nervous system to cause meningitis. The risk factors: skipping vaccination in childhood, then age. Bacterial meningitis is very common in young people. Viral meningitis is common in children younger than age 5, but bacterial meningitis is common in young age. Then living in crowded area, pregnancy, and compromised immune status, like HIV, alcoholic person, diabetic patient, or patient using any immunosuppressant drug. So all these are very prone to meningitis. So your compromised immune status, pregnancy, living in crowded area, age, and skipping vaccination in childhood. These are the risk factors for meningitis. Now we are mainly concerned with bacterial meningitis. So we discuss some bacterial meningitis. Before that, something about the anatomy or relevant CNS anatomy. Unless knowledge of this, you cannot understand about meningitis. Your brain is protected from injury by all of these. Your brain is protected from injury by the skull, the meninges, cerebrospinal fluid, and blood-brain barrier. So it is the protection of your brain. What is blood-brain barrier? What is blood-brain barrier? Blood-brain barrier prevent or don't allow the bacteria to gain entry or to affect the brain parenchyma. So blood-brain barrier is very very important. And whenever there is hit or damage to the blood-brain barrier, bacteria gain entry. Now what is this blood-brain barrier? As the name suggests, blood-brain barrier means it is constituted by capillaries and the cells of brain. Which are the components of blood-brain barrier? These are the components of blood-brain barrier. The components are mainly endothelial cell layer of the capillaries. Endothelial cell layer of the capillaries. This endothelial cell layer adjoined by tight cell-to-cell junction. There is no gap there is no gap in between cell and cell. It is adjoined by tight cell-to-cell junction proteins and collagen in the cell. So endothelial cell layer, the cells are very close to each other and there is no gap in between two cells. There is no gap in between two cells. There is tight cell to cell junction. Then come basement membrane. So endothelial cell layer of capillaries, then come basement membrane. And then this is surrounded by pericytes and astrocyte food process. Pericytes and astrocyte food process. See, this is the capillary. This is the endothelial lining with tight junctions. Then come basement membrane. Then come pericytes. So this is the pericytes. And then astrocytes. Astrocyte with food process. This is completely covered. Astrocyte with food process is completely covered. So these all factors or these are the components of blood-brain barrier. This form an additional continuous stratum that separates the blood vessel from brain tissues. This is the difference in general capillary and capillary of the brain. General capillary, the endothelial cell layer having fenestrations. This is capillary in general and this is the capillary of brain. So in general, the capillary there are fenestrations. Basement membrane is intact, but fenestrations are there in between or intracellular gap are there. The endothelial lining, intracellular gaps. So if there are intracellular gaps, bacteria can gain entry. Bacteria can gain entry. But there are no intracellular gap in brain. So blood-brain barrier is very very protective mechanism for your nervous system to protect from infection. Three layers of meninges, dura, arachnoid, which cover and protect your central nervous system. They enclose and protect the vessels also, and they contain cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is nothing but it is a liquid cushion for the brain and for the spinal cord. Your brain floats in cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is secreted or it is formed by choroid plexus of the brain ventricles. Now, the etiology of bacterial meningitis. Which are the common bacteria which cause meningitis? The most common bacteria which cause bacterial meningitis or acute pyogenic meningitis. These are also called acute pyogenic meningitis or bacterial meningitis. The most common organism is Streptococcus pneumoniae or pneumococci. Then come Neisseria meningitis. Then come Staph aureus, Mycoplasma, Haemophilus influenza, and Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So these are the common bacteria causing meningitis. Pathogenesis: bacteria that gain entry crossing blood-brain barrier. They initiate inflammation. Whenever there is inflammation in the body, formation of exudate. This exudate enmesh the blood vessels of the brain. Then it spread over the brain. It can block the cerebrospinal fluid pathway. If it blocks cerebrospinal fluid pathway, there will occur increased intracranial pressure. There will occur increased intracranial pressure. if it blocks the flow of the CSF. Then there are inflammation of brain tissue, which can cause edema, formation of exudate, and can cause damage to the brain parenchyma. It can cause damage to brain parenchyma. So inflammation of brain tissue cause damage, cerebral edema, and that results in motor sensory disturbances. That results in motor sensory disturbances, disturbed level of consciousness or altered level of consciousness, irritation of medial layer and spinal nerve root, obstruction to the flow of CSF, that increase intracranial pressure are also called hydrocephalus or the pressure effects. So this is the total pathogenesis of the bacterial meningitis. What happens? Bacteria that get into after crossing blood-brain barrier, they initiate inflammation. Inflammation means there is edema, there is formation of exudate. This exudate spread over the brain tissue or over the path. The, it spread the way. Then there is formation of exudate, which envelops the blood vessels. It spread over the brain parenchyma. It can block CSF pathway. Thereafter inflammation, thereafter cerebroedema, which results in motor sensory disturbance, disturbed level of consciousness, irritation of medial layers, and spinal roots, obstruction to the flow of CSF leading to hydrocephalus. So that is the total pathogenesis. Means in meningitis, it can affect motor system, sensory system, your level of consciousness, and obstruction to the CSF flow. See, this inflammatory process, it results in cerebral edema and damage to the cerebral cortex. And damage to the cerebral cortex. If there is damage to cerebral cortex, it affects your level of consciousness. Patient can be drowsy, patient can be irritable, patient can be comatose, or patient can become unconscious. Whenever there is damage to cerebral cortex, conscious disturbance, convergence can occur, motor disturbance means weakness, paralysis can occur, sensory disturbance, loss of sensation can occur, meningeal irritation. Signs of meningeal irritation are nothing but neck stiffness. They are the signs of meningeal irritation, which occurs because the spinal nerve root is irritated. Then cranial nerve damage also can occur. Cranial nerve damage also can occur. So inflammatory process can lead to all these effects. Inflammatory process lead to damage to cortex and all these effects. Consciousness disturbance, patient can be drowsy, can be irritable, can be unconscious or comatose. Convergence can occur, cranial nerve palsy can occur, motor disturbance, sensory disturbance, and meningeal irritation. That is the pathogenesis of bacterial or acute pyogenetic meningitis. Now, which are the symptoms or the common complaints in patient with meningitis? The common complaint, no doubt, is the infection. It is a bacterial infection, so no doubt fever is the first complaint. In any bacterial infection, fever is the first complaint. Any infection, viral infection, bacterial infection, fever is the common complaint. So your first complaint of patient is high-grade fever. Then, because of involvement of central nervous system, because of involvement of meninges, no doubt, another common complaint is headache. Another common complaint is headache and vomiting. So high-grade fever, headache and vomiting. These are the three cardinal symptoms of meningitis. Always suggest involvement of meninges. Whenever patient presented with headache, high-grade fever, headache, vomiting, neck stiffness, neck become very stiff. Movements are not possible. Neck is very stiff and movements are not possible. Always suspect meningitis. Always suspect meningitis. So high-grade fever, headache, vomiting, photophobia. Photophobia means patient not tolerating light. Patient prefer dark room or not tolerating bright light. That is called photophobia. High-grade fever, headache, vomiting, photophobia. Then altered level of consciousness, patient can be drowsy, comatose, irritable. Conversion can occur. Cranial nerve palsy can occur. There can be rash over the body, particularly if Neisseria meningitis is the organism causing meningitis. Then there can occur purpuric rash over the body. And then symptoms of respiratory cause. Meningitis can be secondary to respiratory infection like pneumonia, lung abscess, can be secondary to gastrointestinal infection like diarrhea, can be secondary to ear infection like otitis media. So symptoms of the respiratory cause. So main symptoms fever, headache, vomiting, hypophagy. These are the cardinal symptoms of meningitis. Then altered level of consciousness, convulsions, cranial nerve palsy, rash over the body, particularly if the organism is visibly meningitis. Symptoms of respiratory cause like respiratory infection, this patient having cough, patient having breathlessness. In case of GIT, patient complaining of loose motions, diarrhea, ear infection, patient complaining of discharge from the ear, regular discharge from the ear, that suggests otitis media, like that. So symptom of the respiratory cause. Headache, altered mental status, photophobia, neck stiffness, neck is very stiff, patient is unable to move the neck, high grade fever, if meningococcal infection, then fatigue over the body, that is rash over the body, the other signs. Skin rash, in Neisseria meningitis. In case of signs of meningeal irritation or signs of the spinal nerve root irritation. Signs of meningeal irritation or spinal nerve root irritation. So signs of meningeal irritation are neck stiffness, and there are two signs, that is Kernick sign and Good-Zimke sign. We will see how to evaluate Kernick and Good-Zimke sign. That is suggestive of meningitis. If these two signs are positive, if there is neck stiffness, neck is very stiff, patient is unable to flex the neck. If patient is unable to flex the neck is very stiff, and these two signs are supposed positive. The next sign and Good-Zimke sign, always suggestive of meningitis. There is a short note on signs of meningitis. There is a short note on signs of meningitis. See, this is Kernick sign, this is Good-Zimke sign. How to elicit Kernick sign? There is severe stiffness of the hamstring muscle. Hamstring muscle means muscles of the back of thigh. Hamstring muscles means muscles of back of thigh. There is stiffness of the hamstring. This stiffness is because of spinal nerve root irritation. Which is because of spinal nerve root irritation. So this severe stiffness of the hamstring causes inability to straighten the leg when the hip is flexed to 90 degree. So what to do? You have to flex the patient's hip to 90 degree, knee to 90 degree, and then you extend the knee. First you flex hip and knee to 90 degree, and then slowly extend the knee. So patient is not able to extend the knee because of the stiffness of the hamstring muscles, and there will occur pain and flexion of the neck. So that is called as positive Kernick sign. This is called positive Kernick sign. The severe stiffness of hamstring cause inability to straighten the leg when the hip is flexed to 90 degree. This is called Kernick sign. If this sign is positive, suggestive of meningitis. Now, what is Good-Zimke sign? Another physical demonstrable symptom or sign of meningitis is Good-Zimke sign. There is severe neck stiffness. There is severe neck stiffness which causes a patient's hip and knee to flex when the neck is flexed. If you flex the neck, there is automatically flexion of hip and knee. If you try to flex the neck, if you try to flex the neck is also very stiff. You are not able to flex the neck, you are not able to touch your chin to the chest. Next difference means you are not able to touch your chin to the chest. Not flexion is not possible because of this stiffness. And if you try to flex the neck, there will occur automatic flexion of hip and knee. This is called Good-Zimke sign. So positive Kernick sign, positive Good-Zimke sign suggests your meningitis. So rash, these two signs, neck stiffness, these are the signs in meningitis. And there is a short note over the signs of meningitis. There can be a long question on acute bacterial or pyogenic meningitis. Now, patient presented to you. Patient presented to you with high-grade fever, headache, vomiting, photophobia, and neck stiffness. If you are suspecting after history, after examination, if these two signs are positive, and if you are suspecting that patient may suffer from meningitis, particularly active bacterial pyogenic meningitis, now which are the investigations to prove that patient is suffering from meningitis. Now you have to prove by investigation. So your provisional diagnosis is meningitis. Now you have to do investigations to support your diagnosis. Now the basic investigations like complete blood count, then blood sugar level random to rule out diabetes. Complete blood count, if WBC count is raised, that means suggestive of bacterial infection. Then other, if patient complaining of headache, vomiting, you have to rule out the other possibilities or other pathology in the brain. So to rule out other pathology in the brain which can cause headache, vomiting, you have to do CT scan or MRI of the brain to rule out other causes. To rule out other causes. So it is compulsory to do either CT or MRI of the brain. Then fundus examination means examination of fundus part of your eye with the help of ophthalmoscope. There is an instrument called ophthalmoscope. With the help of that ophthalmoscope, you can visualize the fundus of your eye. So what to do on fundus examination? You have to see the presence of papiloedema. Edema of the optic disc is called papiloedema. It is the edema of optic disc, that is called papiloedema. Presence of papiloedema or edema of the optic disc suggests that there is increased intracranial pressure. Suggest increase intracranial pressure. So fundus examination to rule out papiloedema means edema of the optic disc, which is suggestive of increase intracranial pressure. Now the diagnostic to prove meningitis means to prove bacterial infection of the brain. Now to prove bacterial infection of the brain, bacterial infection of the meninges. So to prove this, the diagnostic investigation is examination of cerebrospinal fluid by doing lumbar puncture. This is the diagnostic investigation. All these are supportive investigations: CBC, PSA, CT, MRI, fundus. But the most diagnostic is examination of cerebrospinal fluid by doing lumbar puncture. Lumbar puncture, also called spinal tap, it is a procedure where a sample of cerebrospinal fluid is taken for examination. Patient usually lie on bed on one side, lateral recumbent position, either right lateral or left lateral, with knees pulled up into your abdomen against the chest. Patient can be in sitting position also with leaning forward. Now you have to sterilize the area. You have to take lumbar puncture needle. You have to take the prick to the skin and tissue between the two vertebrae, means in the intervertebral space. You have to pass lumbar puncture needle in intervertebral space. Now which space is preferred for lumbar puncture? The space between L3 and L4 vertebra. The space between L3 and L4 vertebra. You have to take out the CSF sample from intervertebral space with the help of a lumbar puncture needle. And the preferred site is the space between L3 and L4 vertebra. CSF leak back through the needle, you have to collect in tubes. Generally 6 to 7 ml is sufficient for the examination. Normal CSF pressure is 50 to 180 milliliters of water. So this is the procedure. The preferred site is intervertebral space, that is in between L3 and L4. This is your needle. You have to pass in intervertebral space L3 and L4 slowly, and you have to withdraw the cerebrospinal fluid. This is the patient's position. Patient can be in sitting position or can be in lateral recumbent position, either left lateral or right lateral with knees put inside. See, this is the convexity of your back. You have to do maximum convexity to the back. This is the right position of patient. And this is the space in between L3 and L4, the level of entry. Now how to decide L3, L4? It is at the level of anterior superior iliac spine. This space is at the level of, you have to palpate anterior superior iliac spine, and this space is in the line of anterior superior iliac spine. So it is the level of iliac crest, L3 and L4. This is the spinal needle inserted. So this is the picture of spinal needle, and you have to collect the sample. This is called lumbar puncture procedure of spinal tap. Now Once you remove cerebrospinal fluid, 6 to 7 ml is sufficient. You have to send to the laboratory for examination, for biochemical analysis, for cytological examination. Now it is normal characteristic of CSF. Before that, we should do the normal, so biochemical analysis and cytological examination. Just as we discussing neural fluid, ascitic fluid, like that. So CSF analysis, this is CSF normal. Normally CSF is very clear, watery. Specific gravity 1.004 to 1.007. Normal CSF pressure is 60 to 180 milliliter of water. Proteins normal level 15 to 45. Sugar 45 to 80, and total leukocyte count 0 to 5 cells per cubic meter of water. So this is your normal CSF. What you see: specific gravity, pressure, proteins, sugar, and cells or cell count. What happens in meningitis? The CSF appears cloudy and turbid, not clear. Cloudy or turbid. Specific gravity more than 1.007. Protein level can be increased more than 80, can reach to 100 or 150 milligram percent to more than 80 milligram, or can reach to 100 or 150. Sugars decrease less than 40 because bacteria they use. So low sugar, increased protein level because it is exudative fluid. In infection, any fluid is exudative or inflammatory. So protein level is always raised. Either it is pleural fluid, either it is ascitic fluid, either it is CSF. Whenever it is exudate, secondary to infection, protein level always raised, sugar level decrease, specific gravity increase, cell count increase. So in any exudate or inflammatory condition, the biochemical analysis, either it is pleural fluid, either it is ascitic fluid, either it is CSF. The characteristics are same: increased protein level, decreased sugar, increased cell count, and appearance is also different, either cloudy or turbid, not clear. So it is always suggestive of inflammatory or exudate. So cells more than 1000 and with predominant neutrophils. Normal cells are 0 to 5. Here cell count is more than 1000 cells with predominance of neutrophils, means suggestive of acute bacterial infection. Then which are the other investigation you can do on CSF? You can do gram stain, you can do culture, and to find out the bacteria which cause meningitis. So culture and sensitivity of the CSF food. So gram stain and culture sensitivity. Culture is to identify the organism and also to decide the antibiotic sensitivity so that you can do correct treatment. So this is CSF analysis, CSF normal and CSF in meningitis. So now you make the diagnosis of meningitis. Now the treatment, therapeutic principles. No doubt it is bacterial infection, it is pyogenic meningitis, so antibiotic is the treatment. So for that, antibiotic should have good permeability for blood-brain barrier, which is the main obstacle, blood-brain barrier. This blood-brain barrier should allow your antibiotic to reach to the brain tissue. It should allow the antibiotic to reach to the brain tissue. So the antibiotic having good permeability for blood-brain barrier are preferred. Then you have to give the drugs in combination. A single drug is not sufficient. With high dose and for an extended period. Antibiotics should be in combination with good permeability to blood-brain barrier in high doses so as to achieve a good concentration into your cerebrospinal fluid. High dose is required to achieve a good concentration